Morning, everybody. Today is May 18th, and this morning I wanted to talk to you guys about containment during the Cold War. I want to explain what containment is and how it played out. So, without any further ado, let's get going. Share my screen. Okay, so our learning targets for today is that you'll be able to explain the concept of containment to the members of your family, even if they don't want to hear about it. Go ahead and impress them. Maybe get into a discussion, you never know. And your other thing is that you'll be able to talk about how the US's attempt to contain communism in Korea and Vietnam, you'll be able to explain that to your pets if you have them. I don't know about you guys, but my pets are fairly engaged in a lot of things. And I'll be honest, they're not at all interested in communism and containing it. But if they were, I'd be able to explain it. And maybe you guys can too. All right. So, quick overview of the Cold War so far. It starts when World War II is over. The United States, we are frenemies with the Soviet Union during the war. What that means is we don't like each other that much, but we have a common enemy in Germany. So we joined forces during the war. But we quickly find out that as soon as World War II ends, the tensions that we have between the Soviet Union and the US, they kind of really explode. We never actually fight face to face with the Soviet Union. Nobody wanted to have that fight. But we do have these weird sort of, they call them proxy wars, where our friends fight their friends, or their friends fight us. And so it's really, really complicated, and we're going to try to just give you guys a basic overview for it. So as you guys proceed down the line, at least you'll have heard about all this stuff, and you'll have a good sense of what it's all about. Okay, so the policy of containment. This is the most important thing to know about the Cold War. I'm laughing because my neighbor's mowing his lawn. I wonder if you guys could hear that. Anyway, the policy of containment was we did not want communism to spread. And just about everything we do during the Cold War has to do with containment. So this is the one thing, if you guys remember anything from the Cold War, this is the one thing you got to remember, because it just kind of dictates everything else. Okay, so the U.S. and really most countries, nobody wants to fight after World War II. It was brutal. We saw just the toll that it took on the entire world. So nobody wants to fight. However, we also do not want to see communism spread. So what do we do about it? Well, we decide that we're going to leave communist countries alone. We are not going to try to stop them from being communist. You know, if you're communist, go ahead, great, that's fine. But what we do try to do is we're going to try to stop other nations from becoming communist. And that's what we mean by containment. So we're going to see where communists exist, we're not going to touch it, but we don't want to see it kind of spill over into other places. And like I just said before, this concept really kind of dictates almost every single move that we make in terms of foreign policy during the Cold War. Today we're going to look at three of them. The first one's the Marshall Plan. All right, this was pretty wild, because what we decided to do was after the wars ended, we decided that we were going to spend really billions of dollars rebuilding Europe. We rebuild our friends like England, but we also spend a lot of money, believe it or not, rebuilding Germany, specifically West Germany. Those are the people we had just been fighting for 4 years. So why were we spending all this money to rebuild them? Well, I think we learned some lessons from World War I, which is, you know, be careful how you treat your former enemy, because they may be your future enemy too. So that was a big part of it. And we wanted them to prosper very quickly as they possibly could after the war, so they can get back on their feet and get some economic independence. That was going to be really important for them. We thought that would make the people of those countries happy, and if the people are happy, well, then they're not going to want to go support a guy like Hitler and have another war. Okay, so the first idea is behind the Marshall Plan is use our money to kind of rebuild for economic prosperity. The second part of it, though, was we wanted to, those countries that we were going to give money to, we wanted them to like us. We wanted them to look at the United States as sort of the good guys. You know, United States, that's the country that rebuilt our roads or rebuilt our hospitals. And so when communists came knocking on the door and saying, hey, look how great communism is, the people of those countries would be able to, they'd be able to just say, I don't know, look at all the great things America's doing for us. Okay, so that's the Marshall Plan. Jumping over to our next one is the Korean War. By the way, guys, stop this video at any time if you guys want to work on the Google Doc to answer the questions. Feel free to pause at any time. All right, Murphy's here. He wants me to throw things here. Let's see if I can do this and teach you guys at the same time. All right, so let's get to the Korean War. Okay, so background. The Korean Peninsula is split in two. The Soviets basically control the north. The Americans basically control the south. Very similar sort of arrangement like you saw in Germany with East Germany and West Germany. The Soviets, they're not going to be too keen on having the United States influence a country so close to them. As you'll see in a second on a map, the South Korea is very, very close, and North Korea literally borders the Soviet Union. So they're really nervous about having us there because, again, guys, we're frenemies, and so they don't like us that much. So what does the Soviet Union do about it? Well, they arm the North Koreans. They give them everything they need to fight a war: money, weapons, tanks, uniforms, all that stuff. And they said, yeah, you guys should totally go ahead and invade South Korea. The goal would be for the Soviets to be like, hey, we're trying to unify Korea. But really their bigger goal, maybe their more secret goal, would be to get rid of the United States influence. Check out this map of Korea. You can see where the north is split from the south, and that's a really important word when it comes to the Korean War. It's called the 38th parallel. And also notice that North Korea borders mostly China, but a tiny little smidge of it borders the Soviet Union. Also, we should note that by this time in history, China has also become a communist country. So North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union are all going to be kind of hanging out in the, in the same places. They're going to be going to the same restaurants. They like each other. I'd like you guys to kind of go back and check this map out after we talk about the war itself, because this has got some great, you can see all those red and blue lines on there, and that really kind of shows you the course of the war. So definitely come back to this map and pause this video so you can see it. You can also see the presentation, which I'll be sharing with you. Okay, so what happened on June 25th, 1950? North Korea invades the South. Nobody saw this coming. And within just like literally the space of a summer, they take over almost the entire peninsula. Again, go back and look at that map and you can see that there's just this tiny little piece at the southern end of the peninsula that still remains in control of South Korea. Well, guys, what's our big word in the Cold War? Containment. And so we have to stop the spread of communism. So the United States, with the support of the newly formed United Nations, we lead a fight to push the North out of the South of Korea. Really, our goal would be getting them back up to that 38th parallel. And once we can do that, technically we've achieved containment, right? Because all we want to do is stop the spread of it. We don't necessarily want to take over any communist countries. We just want to stop them from spreading, okay? So this does work. However, it's really, really complicated. If we were doing this in real school, we would take a whole class to kind of talk about the ins and outs of how crazy this conflict was. It does end, and technically we achieve our goal. We have it, if you go back to the map, you'll see that sort of truce line, and that's right at the 30th parallel, which is where all this started in the first place. So we are successful. So the question is, do we win the war? Yeah, we contained communism, but we never got rid of them in the North. So some people say this is a tie. Other people will say this is a loss. I think about 58,000 American soldiers were killed over about a 3-year period. And really, we achieved our goal within the first 6 months. So we spent another 2.5 years fighting. And a lot of people say, well, for what, guys? We didn't get anything out of that last couple of years of the war. And so a lot of people say this is almost like a stalemate. So anyway, that's the Korean War. One little sort of interesting piece of this is there was never really an official end to this conflict. We had a ceasefire, which means we're not going to shoot each other, but usually that's followed by a treaty that says, hey, the war is ended, and this is what we agreed to. You can have this, we'll take that. But that never happens in the Korean War. So technically, as we sit here today, the Korean War is technically still going on. Which is why when it's not a COVID world, usually what happens in North Korea dominates the news. So, I would not be surprised to see something like that. Once all this COVID stuff goes away, we'll see some stuff about Korea. We usually do. Okay, guys, again, this is totally oversimplified, all this stuff, jumping over to the Vietnam War right now. So in a second, you'll get to see a map of Vietnam, and it looks very similar to Korea. We've got a nation that's split in half. The communists control the north, the non-communists control the south. Who do we support as the United States? We support the south. Communism was becoming popular in South Korea, and the U.S. really the seeds of this war start because we start sending money, weapons, some soldiers to South Korea to try to stop the communist uprisings that were taking place there. That starts as early as the 1950s under President Eisenhower. We're going to see this war doesn't officially come to end to 1972. So we're talking about 14, 15 years of a pretty crazy war. Murph, come and sit with me. You can't be barking. I don't know if you guys just hear Murphy there. Okay, so why do we do this? Why do we give them the support and that eventually leads us to war? Well, we called it the domino theory. And that was basically the idea that, okay, if South Vietnam becomes communism, Thailand is going to become communist and all the countries in that region. And so if you guys ever line up a thing of dominoes and you push over the first one and the next one falls and the next one falls, well, that's what we were afraid of. And let's take a look at the map here. And so we can see that North Vietnam's in pink, the non-communist South's in green. Well, we've got Laos and Cambodia and Thailand. If we were to zoom out even further, there's a whole load of other countries in that area. And the United States was desperately afraid that that whole region would become communist. Notice right north of North Vietnam, communist China. So the dominoes had been falling, and for some reason, this was the one the United States was like, no, this is where it stops. And we go through tremendous lengths to stop the spread of communism to South Vietnam. And it's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. There are Republican presidents and Democrat presidents who are both heavily invested in doing this. It was a pretty unified sort of United States way of thinking during the Cold War, stop the spread of communism. All right. So by the time 1968 rolls around, we've got 500,000 American troops there. We've got a draft here at home. All of this is highly controversial, and we're going to talk to you guys about this later. And I think sometime next week, what was happening here in the United States during the war. But again, 500,000 soldiers, brutal fighting. I said the Japanese. The Vietnamese were guerrilla fighting, which means, small group surprise attacks, really difficult for us to fight. They weren't wearing uniforms. We couldn't tell if someone was a farmer or a soldier. And in many cases, we had to assume that he was a soldier or she was a soldier. The soldiers were grandmothers and little children. And so this put our soldiers, just a tremendous, what a terrible fight it must have been for them, not knowing if someone approaching you is the enemy or not, but knowing that they might be, knowing that you might be killed or your fellow soldiers might be killed. And the action that our soldiers had to take was absolutely brutal. All right. And so again, if you saw on that last slide, that in the Vietnam War, it eventually just comes to an end in 1972. We withdraw. We say we've had enough. And what happens almost immediately after our withdrawal is the communists do take over South Vietnam, and Vietnam becomes a united country, however, a communist united country. So this is when we have to chalk up to our first loss in American history. This is the first war that America technically loses. Our goal is to stop the spread of communism. We did not stop that spread of communism. Okay, so guys, what did we learn today? We learned about the policy of containment, and this is the word. When you think of the Cold War and American foreign policy, think containment, stop the spread of communism. 2, we tried to do this in lots of different ways. One way, money. Let's spend money. Rebuild our enemies. We did that in Europe with something called the Marshall Plan. By the way, we also did it in Japan. It had a different name, but it was the same idea. Let's rebuild And maybe that economic stability that we can create might allow for good relationships, which it has. We are friends with Germany and Japan today. All right. We were willing to use our military at times to achieve this goal through the Korean and Vietnam Wars. We did both of these wars through something called the United Nations. And here's a quick fun fact. Well, before I get to the fun fact, sometimes we were successful. The Marshall Plan was successful. That absolutely worked. The Korean War, you could argue it was a tie, but you could also argue it was a success because communism did not spread. Sometimes we were not successful. The Vietnam War is the great example of that, probably the biggest example of our failures of containment. Although you could argue Cuba, which we'll get to next week, that Cuba becomes communist and they're kind of close. So we weren't always successful with our missions. And just a quick fun fact about the Vietnam and the Korean War. We never officially declared war for either one of those conflicts. It was a decision where Congress gave the president the green light to kind of use the military to achieve these goals, but there was not an official declaration of war. In fact, we haven't had an official declaration of war since December 8th, 1941. So there's some fun facts for you guys. And that's what we have. Hey, shoot me for any questions. Email, ask Mr. Taylor. I'm happy to answer any questions because both these things are really, really complicated. A lot of details that I left out. But hopefully we covered enough of it so you have a sense of what happened in all of those places. All right, guys, and so that's it from me. I hope that you guys have a great week. Start sending in your questions and your answers, and look forward to hearing from you guys. Okay, see you later.